3 of those times are used in the 2 verses that I referred to, chapter 9, verses 26 to 28. Once for all. The victory of Jesus is a victory that's been completed. The battle is over. The work is done. Jesus is our victorious high priest, seated at the right hand of God. You know, that calls for an amen. Amen. But Jesus, secondly, is also a compassionate priest. The writer says, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tempted as we are tempted, yet without sin. Because Jesus was both human and divine, he is able to be that sympathetic, caring high priest. He knows the temptations that we humans are subject to. He has faced them. And he understands and knows, nevertheless, that what each one of us encounters and deals with at every moment of our life is what he has experienced. And so we know that Jesus understands. We know that he cares. That's why we sang that hymn, what a friend we have in Jesus. Because he understands us. And because of that unique nature of his as the God-man, he faced temptations, in fact, that were far greater than anything you and I have ever faced. His temptations, you see, were based on the fact that he was divine. Our author compares Jesus to human priests who are aware of their own sinfulness and weakness, and therefore they can deal gently with those to whom they minister. Now this phrase, deal gently, or be kind, or be compassionate, is another unique word in the Greek language. Dr. Barclay, in his commentary, says that it's an expression of a feeling that is midway between anger and lazy indifference and tolerance. It's a beautiful word. And another commentator says that it's a philosophical term that expresses a moderate position between apathy on the one hand, indifference, not caring, and excited, almost fanatical response on the other hand. So you see, a human priest can neither be apathetic or unduly alarmed by the fact that people fall into sin. I had a nephew tell me not long ago when I was talking with him, he said, why are we so surprised when non-Christians act like non-Christians? We read in the paper, we hear about some terrible thing that's happened that people have done. Why does that surprise us? You see, a pastor has to be understanding of his people, not indifferent to what they're doing, but not so alarmed by what they're doing that he gets all excited and upset. A human priest, you see, knows the sinful tendency that all humans are subject to. That's why the book of Leviticus tells us that on the Day of Atonement, which is the Jewish day of Yom Kippur, the high priest must first make atonement for himself before he comes in to offer sacrifice for the benefit of the people. But Jesus, our high priest, though he faced all the temptations that we face, we are told he was without sin. That's why he's able to deal gently and mercifully with us as he intercedes for us before God's throne. One commentator said that Jesus' whole life was one of temptation. The very fact that he had powers and abilities with which we humans don't possess only added to the trials and temptations that he faced. Have you ever been tempted to turn stones into bread? But Jesus was. No man or woman has ever known the anguish of soul that Jesus experienced in the Garden of Gethsemane. But because he came through that and through every temptation he faced victoriously without sin, we too can find in him a high priest who truly does sympathize and care. Does Jesus care? Oh, yes, he cares. I know his heart is touched with my grief. That's a hymn that we love to sing also. And because we know that Jesus cares, our hearts resonate with what the author now tells us. What one writer said is one of the most tender invitations to be found anywhere in the New Testament. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in time of need. We are admonished to come boldly into God's presence with our prayers and our supplications, because we know that they'll be sympathetically received. There is mercy and grace for every need at the throne of God. Jesus knows. Jesus understands. Jesus has been through what we go through. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Friends, why are we so often prayerless? It's a question I ask myself. Why do I not heed this invitation to come with confidence and with boldness to God's throne with my prayers and requests? A well-known English congregational minister of 100 years ago. In fact, I read someplace that he brought the word grace back into Protestant theology in Britain 100 years ago. His name was P.T. Forsyth. And he said that prayerlessness is the root of all sin. When we're faced with a crisis situation, a job loss, a tragic accident, a sudden illness, we all so often say, well, all we can do is pray. All we can do is pray. That's all we need to do. That's all we need to do. It's the height of human arrogance and pride to think that we can cope with our own problems in our own strength and wisdom. One commentator said, to be prayerless is to be guilty of the worst kind of practical atheism. When we fail to pray, we rob ourselves of the mercy and grace and help that is abundantly available at God's throne of grace, because he is a merciful, compassionate high priest, just waiting for us to pray. And then in the third place, the author goes on to say that Jesus, our high priest, is simply fulfilling the appointment that God made for him. He was filling the role that God called him to. He was obedient to God's call. He didn't exalt himself to that position, but like Aaron in the Old Testament, he was called to it. No one takes this honor on himself, the Bible says, but only when he is called by God, as Aaron was. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made high priest, but was appointed by him who said, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." Jesus himself had said in his controversy with the Jewish religious leaders, John chapter 8, verse 54, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It's my Father who glorifies me." The text makes it clear that the glory of being a high priest was not self-assumed, but rather it was bestowed on him by God.